Alright, the French Revolution, probably one of the more complicated events to happen in history, unfortunately, but it is a rather complicated ordeal. But first off, we have to look into why did it happen and why now. The French Revolution is going to occur shortly after the American Revolution, and that's in part why it starts when it does. First off, the French state was bankrupt due to a series of wars that are happening throughout the entirety of the 1700s, but also by bankrolling the United States, getting involved in the war by fueling the naval forces, transporting of arms and supplies for the Americans. They did, for example, supply half of all of the arms, ammunition used by the American forces. So already after the American Revolution, the war ends, 1781, officially in 1783 due to the peace agreement. That's going to be shortly after, within a decade, the French are going to have their revolution. But shortly after, certainly the financial state is pretty bad. But what happened was they had a pretty bad harvest. There was a lot of starvation going on in France, and so that really what sparks much of the issues, or at least provides for the French Revolution to occur. So with the starvation, all social classes realized something needs to change, something needs to happen. Prior to this point, the king was in charge. This was an absolutist state, but now he's going to have to call on for help to help basically France get out of this bankrupt situation. First you have to understand that there are three estates in France. This is basically social classes. The first estate is the clergy, numbering about 130,000 people at this time. The second estate is nobility, numbering about 350,000 people at this time. The rest of the population is going to be the third estate, which is everybody else, the commoners, the peasants, the people who grow the land. So we're talking millions of people at this time. Sorry. Excuse me. No. These can be farmers, they can be shopkeepers, skilled workers, but at this time you're also seeing a growing middle class. Basically, this is people who are not noble, who are not of the clergy class, but have a lot of money. They own a lot of land, they're in charge of all the business and the trade, and so they gain quite a bit of money. So the middle class have a bunch of money, but they don't really have a whole lot of power. Now these harvests are going to happen in 1787 and 1788. One-third of the population is poor. They don't have privileges. They don't have as many rights. And so with the starving population, and they have the money, they know something needs to change. France is bankrupt. So the king summons the Estates General, and the Estates General is basically a convening of these three classes. Of course, you're not going to fit all hundreds of thousands of each Estates General. They're basically going to elect representatives. Now, the Estates General hasn't been called on for several hundred years. So this basically demonstrates the seriousness of this issue. Now, the king is going to say that there are going to be 300 delegates for the first estate, 300 delegates for the second estate, and 600 delegates for the third estate. And that's how they're going to come together and talk this out. On March 5th, 1789 is going to be when this meeting comes to order. The first thing they decide to discuss is not the financial situation, but in fact how voting is going to come across and how much each vote is going to count for, whether it be the first, second, or third estate. That's what they're trying to discuss, while everyone else in France is starving. Now, what happens is basically the first and the second estate come together, and they convince the king that the third estate doesn't matter, which is their opinion for throughout the entire medieval age as well. And so they actually lock and close the doors in the face of the third estate. So what the third estate does is you have these 600 delegates. They go to a tennis court and they make an oath that they are not going to leave the tennis court unless they are recognized. And this happens on June 20th of 1789. And they start to form their own political movement, which they're hoping to become a new government where they will have more of a say. And they're drawing on a lot of the ideas that the American Revolution has sparked. So separation of church and state, the social contract, certainly a bicameral Congress, the people being in charge rather than the nobles or the king. So they're trying to forward this idea of bringing the American Revolution to France. Now, what happens, which kind of blows up this entire situation, is the king, the first and second estate, they agree, okay, we have to recognize the third estate. But also what happens is he really doesn't want to recognize them. He doesn't want them part of the government. And he starts moving troops around France. And basically there's a rumor going on that he is going to crush this third estate tennis court oath with force. This isn't actually what was going on, but rumors, as we're all probably fully aware of, rumors can escalate and be blown out of proportion. And so the common people decide to attack that Bastille on July 14th, 1789. What the Bastille was a prison, but there also was a lot of guns, ammunition. So they attack. There is some fire that gets exchanged, but the essentially the general in charge calls his men to surrender. He does not want Frenchmen attacking Frenchmen. He does not want a civil war, so he puts a stop to it, surrenders the Bastille to the common people. They arm themselves, and unfortunately this general is seen as an agent of the king. He is what is representative of the king, and so they dismember him limb by limb, literally. A noble cause by that individual, but he isn't paid quite well for that risk. Goes on afterwards from July 19th to August 3rd is you have peasant rebellions all throughout Paris, as well as outside of Paris. Now the peasants are armed, they start putting up barricades, and this causes a great fear throughout all of Paris. Because of this, this is going to be when the third estate, the peasants, and those representatives start to gain power. And the king is going to agree to essentially to their demands. One of the demands is the seigneurial rights. These are the rights to the clergy and the nobles, where they don't have to pay taxes, or they get these, or more land, or voting rights. So all of those are going to be abolished on August 4th, 1789. There's also a declaration of the rights of man and citizen on August 26th. Basically, this is a Bill of Rights for the French people. Now, the king at this time decides on October 5th, 1789, he is going to go to Versailles. But in fact, the French decide that he can't go to Versailles. They bring him to Paris. They're very suspicious of the king. They think he might be trying to flee as well as trying to organize an army to crush this entire movement. So they bring him to Paris as basically a hostage. Alright. So, sorry. What this new government, this new Republican government decides to do is they start to organize something that looks like our Congress. They start having forming a new constitution with legislative assembly. They don't get quite there yet when the king decides to flee Paris and try to get to Austria. That happens on June 1791. They capture him right at the border. They bring him back to Paris. So now they're extremely suspicious. But Austria is going to declare war on France on April 20th, 1792. And they're advocating for many other countries in Europe to declare war as well. Their concern is that this revolution might spread beyond French borders and start hitting Austria, Prussia. Britain even has some concerns that all the monarchies will be attacked, and this revolt might hit their borders. So what forms in Paris is a commune with many figures. For example, Danton, he is around from 1759 to 1794. He is going to be in charge at this period of time, from this point of 1792 onward until 1794, of course. They form a national convention on September of 1792, instituting universal male suffrage, so all males are going to have the right to vote in elections. They also abolish the monarchy on September 21st. So this is the end of the monarchy. Now, this revolution starts to fracture into two distinct groups. There's many more groups, which is in part why this situation gets a little confusing. But the main ones are going to be the Gordonians and the Mountain. Now, the basic disagreement between these two groups is on the issue of King Louis, Louis XVI, whether or not to try him for treason. So the first one is whether or not to try him. The second issue is to try him for treason. Then finally, whether or not to execute him. What happens is, of course, he is going to be tried for treason. He is going to be executed on January 21st, 1793, and so that is the end of King Louis in France at this time. There are many different groups fighting for power. This was the first avenue and the first fight, but now they're also having to, one, form a government, two, fight wars with Austria, which has also brought in other groups to come fight them as well. Eventually Prussia, for example, is going to get involved, and they're losing quite substantially. Many of the military leaders are going to fight with this new national convention, so they are going to fight the Austrians, but they're losing quite a bit. So what they do in response is the mobilization, full mobilization of all men and women. They're going to be given weapons, so this is going to be the first, basically, draft in Europe. They draft all men and women, give them a gun, shove them over to the front lines, and basically overwhelm these military forces with men and women with guns. Alright. So that puts at least the militaries of the outside forces at least at bay at first. What you're also going to have is they are going to form a new calendar. They saw the calendar of France was based on Christian systems, and so they end that There's also going to be a Committee of Public Safety in the Reign of Terror is going to get started from July of 1793 to July of 1794. Basically, the situation here is anyone who may potentially be a threat to the new French state. This is coming in line with the execution of King Louis XVI. There could be spies, there could be royal loyalists in France, and so to eliminate that, any sort of speech that may be against France, for example, any sort of curse words against France, they're going to imprison you and potentially execute you. So free speech and free press certainly was not allowed at this period of time. Certainly throughout the French Revolution at this point on, you are not going to have those freedoms. And in fact, people are going to accuse their neighbors and anyone else that they really had a problem with of being a traitor. And this gets really out of control. What I mean by that is they're going to have such a huge amount of people that they foresee need to be executed. They developed the guillotine. Having a sword and beheading people was fine when you only had to execute 1 or 2 people a day, but now you're looking at 20 to 50, hundreds of people being executed, and the blade of a sword is going to get rather dull fairly quickly doing that. And so they invented the guillotine to execute people in mass numbers, using a blade and the weight and gravity to execute people. So the government tried to also control the price of food. That was getting out of control. It was becoming very expensive. People were being executed left and right. This is what the Reign of Terror was. If you were suspected of any wrongdoing, it was very likely that you were going to be executed. Eventually, the Committee of Public Safety, which is the ones who are trying to execute all these apparently treasonous people, they figure out, outside people figure out that the leader, Robespierre, was getting a little out of hand. So on July 28th, 1794, they execute him, and they execute his followers, which is kind of coming into the same sort of method that they were using. But nevertheless, this pretty much ends that sort of reign of terror. And instead, now the conservatives who were in the government decided that, okay, we need to calm down. They start a constitution in 1795 where you're going to have 5 people in charge, basically an oligarchy. And this is going to be a period where nothing really gets done. And in fact, some people start to look at this new rising star, Napoleon Bonaparte, who is coming to power. So that is the first stage, at least, of the French Revolution. Talk a bit more about Napoleon a little bit later, but basic question is, does this fix the French Revolution, or what starts this revolution? The answer is no. No, it doesn't. The main problem was they were broke, and they were in debt, and they need to figure out some sort of economic and financial means to end that debt. They did not. What in fact evoked was the fact that everyone was vying for power and thinking about how to make a government where they're more powerful than the other guy. And in fact, there were use of force to try secure their positions, and that didn't really work either. So you had this massive chaos. You had tens of thousands of people dying due to the hands of this new government, but also due to the wars going across the borders of France. So it really didn't pan out. The British, as well as the Americans, are completely horrified at what's going on in France. It was, in a way, done in the spirit of the American Revolution, but many of the ideas of the French, or of the American Revolution, for example, separation of church and state, popular vote, and all that good stuff, really never got started. In fact, it was just wholesale slaughter left and right. So the Americans had neutrality on this whole escapade. Many French believed that the Americans were going to come over and help out in the revolution, and so the Americans and the French were going to have this great unity. That, in fact, does not happen. Basically, very quickly, everyone figured out that this was not a revolution for rights and equality, pursuit of happiness, and all that other good stuff. In fact, it was just a power grab by many of the different groups in France at the time. So that's more or less how the revolution gets started. There's certainly more detailed aspects of the French Revolution, but not going to go into every single aspect, just a brief overview of the French Revolution.